The Matrix came out in 1999 and it is a classic. But what makes it a classic? And what are some things we can learn from in this movie about great writing and how we can apply some of these things to our storytelling? My great friend Andrew Winch joins me in this episode. You don't want to miss it. But before we get there, remember to go into the description, click on the link for free ebook, and also subscribe, follow, share, all that fun stuff. All right? Peace. Welcome back to Great Stories Change the World. I have another great guest today, Andrew Winch. How you doing, Andrew?
What's up? Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. This is part of my series. I wanted to have some different friends and other authors and guests on to talk about great stories, movies that we thought were great and why. Because I do believe that great stories change the world. I believe that storytelling is a skill that leads to success and impact in all sorts of different areas. And so I want to look at what makes a story great. What can we learn about great stories? And so Andrew, why don't you just kind of tell people who you are, what you do, and with writing especially, and let people know about Havoc. I'm sure you will.
Sure. Yeah. I always wonder if the screen's mirrored because the way we have this written, it actually says Kova whenever it's
No,
backwards.
I see it right.
So anyway, yeah, I'm Andrew. I am the editor-in-chief and joint owner of Havok Publishing. We're a flash fiction publication. We publish one short story, one flash fiction every weekday, 1,000 words or less, and then we run it as a competition. So after the end of a 6-month period, which we call a season, we pick the 30 best stories that we published in that time and we put them into an anthology. Conveniently have one right here, so that's our last one. But yeah, it goes into a nifty little anthology, so we are able to publish a lot of first-time authors and also some seasoned writers as well. And it's sci-fi fantasy bent, but we do some mystery, some thriller without a sci-fi element or a speculative element. But yeah, so obviously my love is in the speculative fiction world, so this stuff is right up my alley. But yeah, I edit that, I write, and I'm all around fiction lover, whether it's movies or books or any of that kind of stuff.
And you usually dress up at least once a year at a conference, right?
I do begrudgingly. It's one of those things where it's like the people that love Halloween but hate to dress up, you know?
That's me. That's
Yeah,
me.
exactly. Right. So I do it out of obligation for the community, but it is pretty fun once I get everything together. And I am an extroverted introvert. So I will get in there, I will be loud, and then I will crash and I'm out. Which is probably
Um,
what's going to happen today.
and why don't you tell people who may not know what flash fiction is? Why don't you kind of let people know exactly what when you say flash fiction, what does that mean?
It's the tweet of the literary world. So basically, 1,000 words or less, which is a little harder than you would think starting out, but then it's a little easier than you think once you get used to it. So you have to write an entire story within 3 pages of document, and it's great because, like we said, people are on the go these days. There's you can go onto the website, read these stories in less than 5 minutes while you're waiting for the bus or while you're in the bathroom or whatever. So it's a wonderful way to get people who say, oh, I wish I could, but I don't have time for reading. This is a great way to get them involved in the whole fiction world and give them a break from reality, which kind of what the Matrix did, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, were you trying to do a segue? Were you trying to do a little
It
segue
just
there?
comes natural these days, Greg.
That's a skill. That's a whole skill. Yeah. So Andrew and I met at the conference we were discussing, and I think I was there the year you were a gorilla. He's been several things
Right.
at different times, but he's there. Usually has a booth with Havoc and the flash fiction thing. And anyway, as I was looking for guests, I was like, man, I got to have Andrew on. And I asked Andrew, what would be a movie you would point people to as an example of great story and something we could learn from? And so he picked, as he already said, The Matrix. So why did you pick The Matrix? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I books along with movies. Well, more so books than movies, but movies for sure. I like the ones that stand the test of time. Now
Hmm.
I add a little asterisk there because I'm not great with the classics. Anything before the '70s, I lose a little interest in. But once a movie's been around for a decade or so, and I can tell people that younger people that haven't seen the movie, haven't heard of it, if I can tell them to watch it and they're blown away, it's a sign of a good movie. And people are still talking about The Matrix today, even if they don't know who Keanu Reeves is, which breaks my heart.
Right?
Uh, yeah, the young people these days, I tell you, rabble, rabble. But yeah, so The Matrix is one of those movies. I remember I was in high school, maybe eighth grade, but certainly no older than sophomore year. I mean, I can look up when it came out, but I think it was '99 or something like that. But anyway, so I remember my friend going to the movie and watching movies and watching it and just trying to explain this thing to me, and I hadn't been to any philosophy classes yet or anything. And he's talking about these giant robots and this guy dumping out of this thing into the real world. And there's these, you're dodging bullets. And like, I need to see this. So I didn't see it until I watched it at home. And I had just got a DVD player and surround sound in my room, which was a big deal at the time. So
Yeah.
my DVD in there and just boom, and that's one of those movies, whenever the credits roll, you're like, I probably need to watch that again. Nowadays, it's a little bit more, it makes more sense because, necessarily so or rightfully so many movies have been inspired by it. So you've got these concepts that this movie popularized, didn't create, but popularized, that every other sci-fi movie for the next 5 or 8 years had some element of the Matrix in it. So yeah, it changed our society in a very impactful way that a lot of movies don't do.
Awesome. Well, so you sent me four reasons why you picked The Matrix and why you think The Matrix is something that we can learn from. So, what's your first point there?
So yeah, the whole story idea. So from the foundation, it was an idea, and the Wachowskis, those were the writers and directors. They are very overt or very transparent about the fact that they were inspired by multiple sources. One of the main ones was Ghost in the Shell, the animated one before the remake, the live action. But so they didn't come up with anything novel, but like I said, they popularized it. And so this idea that we're all in a simulation, goes back to the dawn of philosophy, back to Plato and
Sure.
even Rene Descartes and things like that. So it is a very, very entrenched idea, but not necessarily popularized to the masses. So the fact that the movie revolves around this computer simulation idea that is pretty common speech these days was just completely groundbreaking for the cinematic world. But yeah, so what that you want me to kind of go into what that was in the movie, or
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I think that, for me, I was the same way, right? I think all of us were, we saw the movie and we probably couldn't explain exactly what it was that was so groundbreaking. Like it probably took us a minute to kind of look back, but everyone loved the movie. Everyone loved it and watched it and talked about it. And there were so many different it kind of had the same sort of mystical element like of the force and things like that where you could kind of apply it to a lot of different religious or philosophical
oh
ideas, and
yeah.
that I think that was a strength of that part. And so but it did draw on a lot, but a lot of different sources, and yet did kind of put it all together in a very new way. And like you're saying, it influenced so much since then. So yeah, so what are some of the things about the story wise that you really we're trying to point out?
It was so evident that the Wachowskis and everybody else involved had so much fun writing this movie and producing this movie. There's Easter eggs all over the place, which we can get to in a little bit as far as set design and stuff. But yeah, so the story, the plot in general is just so little things like I saw as I was kind of prepared for this. I'm not a huge fan of Keanu Reeves' performance in this movie for reasons, but I couldn't see it done any other way. And so one of the things that I initially thought was a little bit frustrating, but makes a lot more sense when you think about it, is the first quarter or third of the movie, which is your setup as it goes, you get that defining moment as they're pushed into the story proper. Is Keanu Reeves' character had, I think they said over 35, maybe closer to 40% of his lines were questions. So everything he was doing was asking questions. They used him as that sounding board to just kind of explain what this massive undertaking of a plot was, because they knew from the outset that people weren't going to get this, you know. So they kind of used him as a dummy at the beginning. Obviously, he progresses from there. But so some of the overarching themes, it's a very, like you said, it's a very religious movie. Not specifically Christian, but there are some Christian elements. But you know, they speak to Neo as the one. He's reborn 2 or 3 times in this movie. Whenever he escapes the Matrix, he decides to be the one. And then there's these plot elements of him choosing to be the one, as opposed to some more popular ideas of fate, you know, versus free will. And they even address all these things in there. Again, if you watch the movie and, you know, kind of do a little bit of a breakdown, it's all there, you know. Because they're so dense with dialogue. He says at one point, Morpheus, who is, if you don't know by this point, you know, he is kind of the guru of the movie, the John the Baptist, or, you know, somebody that's heralding and directing Neo as he goes on this journey. He says, "Do you believe in fate?" And Neo says, "No." He says, "Why?" He says, "Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my own life." I mean, it's a very basic concept. He doesn't go into it very deeply, but that's a huge line in the, or huge plot thread of the movie is you're in this matrix. You're in a world created by robots, AI, sentient AI, which is rigid, but it is so complex that you think you have free will, but you actually don't most of the time, because everything is manipulated. So it's this idea that you can live in a rigid structure, but as you start to understand that rigid structure, you can start having control over some of your actions. And ultimately that leads to enlightenment, in this case being set free from the matrix and ultimately learning how to manipulate it. So it's, yeah, just layers upon layers of philosophy in it that just go seamlessly through a great narrative and a great plot that doesn't burden it, which is a real feat.
I agree. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about even with Carla, and I think we will keep coming back to, is you can easily look at the new technology. There was special effects, and there's all sorts of things that were revolutionary for its time, but without the core of meaning and theme, and the very basic contrast of there's a fake world and a real world that allows you to ask these questions and to explore some of these themes that you're talking about, of what's real, what's not real, what's fake, what choices do I have, and all of these things. You know, it allows you to explore those themes in the world. But, you know, we keep coming back to it. What makes the story great is part of what it says, or the questions it has us ask about ourselves. You know, because we're asking the question, would I choose? You know, and that's kind of the bad guy. You know, that's the bad guy's sort of philosophy. Who cares if it's just zeros and ones? It tastes good.
Yeah,
And we can kind of understand that, as much as we don't like him, you know. So there's all those sort of elements to it that kind of make you ask those sort of questions about yourself. And I think that without that core meaning, I don't know that it would have lasted. It would have been oh, you remember that when it was really cool, but it would have almost been dated to some degree without
yeah.
that sort of core.
Do you remember Dark City? Do you
Oh, I
remember that?
loved Dark City. Dark
Yeah,
City
yeah.
was so cool.
Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't quite get into. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, it didn't quite get, you know, as much recognition at the time, and you know, going from the '80s, it's like, okay, yeah, it's may not, it may set a back seat, but it's the same sort of idea. It's like you can just layer, you know, great visual effects and everything, but at its core, it was just a foundational movie that really, it's a paradigm shift, I guess, is what, you know, a good
Yeah,
word
yeah,
for
yeah. Good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Dark City, I own the DVD and I tell people about it, and most people don't have a clue.
Yeah,
Some
yeah,
people know Equilibrium, but
right.
most people don't know Dark City. And I think the problem with Dark City gets into your number two, because I think your number two is really important as well. So what's your second point?
Yeah, yeah, as the pacing of the movie. Like, well, you know, I kind of hinted at that at the beginning, where, you know, Neo, uh, he kind of goes through this transformation and he's asking all these questions at the beginning. But yeah, the pacing in this movie is perfect. It's not a short movie by any means,
No.
but it layers so much in there in such a way that it gives you moments to breathe, moments to digest, moments to reflect back, because they do refer back to things a lot of times. So it's a perfect story arc in a little, I think it's a little less than a little over 2 hours. But yeah, so you start out with a main character. Well, actually, you start out in the Matrix with a scene from Trinity, just so you're immersed in it. But then as the story zooms in on Neo, Keanu Reeves, he's in this hacker world. He wakes up, he goes to a rave. He's very ignorant of the world around him, but it's visually stimulating, and you've got these little seeds of questions that they pepper throughout that really hook you. And then they slowly progress that, and again they layer more questions and more questions onto this until this moment where he takes the red pill, right? And boom, he's out of Wonderland. Or he stays in Wonderland, and he's shown how deep the rabbit hole goes. Is that what he says? But
Right,
and
right,
then
right.
he wakes up in this uh, cell where he's in the real world, surrounded by millions of other pods with people in them, and it's just this mind explosion of this is the real world. They refer to them as copper tops, because they're batteries, they're charging, which is, again, you can pick it apart, like, okay, any animal, why they're using humans, that's just rude. But anyway, the point being that you wake up to this reality, and that was the moment whenever I watched it, I was like, whoa, okay, this movie's for real. And then again, you have a moment of breathing, and they explain things about the real world, both visually and through dialogue, and all these kinds of things. And then, so yeah, then they go into this drastic ramp up of fighting for their life. And then yeah, so anyway, then they go into the climax, and it resolves. But a movie with so much information, they combed this with a fine comb, to make sure that script was perfect as far as pacing goes.
Well, and I think from what I remember of Dark City, and it's interesting you brought that up because it would have been interesting to watch this and
Mm.
compare, because Dark City, as cool as it was slow. I remember it still being really slow.
Yeah.
And what's important to learn about pacing, it doesn't mean that you want it to be action packed all the time. And it's important what you said, like there were moments of breathing, but the action that they had in the movie
Yeah.
was actually worked with the questions, if that makes sense. Like the questions they were asking, like the moments of chasing, or the moments of this, or the whatever the action sort of parts were, actually worked with the questions that they were asking, and or whatever the next step that Neo needed to go through in his character. Like it all worked.
Yes.
And that sort of, like I think you said, breathing, like they allowed a time to take a breath and explain a couple things. I agree, the pacing is perfect.
Well, and a perfect example is that scene where Neo learns kung fu. And they go into the simulation. So yeah, again, you have to clarify the Matrix proper, the real world, and then the heroes in the real world have a simulation program, where they can go in and train and stuff like that. That's not hard lined into the Matrix, so it's safe for them from the bad people. But anyway, so they go into this dojo and they just beat the heck out of each other. And there's some fun little Easter eggs there. I won't throw a lot at in, because you can go and there's a million YouTube videos of, oh, break down the Matrix, and they're fun, man, do it. But in that scene, he says things like, as Neo is getting exhausted, and Morpheus kind of starts beating him. Neo's doubled over, and Morpheus leans forward and says, "Do you think that's air you're breathing now?" So it's these things where they constantly pull back to, you're not really sweating, you can control these things. So in the middle of this awesome fight scene, which choreography is wonderful,
Hmm.
Carla, she probably could pick this movie apart pretty well as well. But yeah, so that scene is just a perfect example of how you drive the plot forward in the middle of an action scene that could have otherwise been a mindless, fan service.
Yeah. Well, and it's it's action, but it's also action explaining, action exploring. Like again, it has different layers of purpose within each scene, and I think that's something that a lot of writers don't get sometimes is that they have a scene, but what makes a scene work is that there are sometimes different levels of conflict because not only is he's in the visual he's fighting Morpheus, but he's also struggling against his own perception, and he's struggling to learn this whole new system and believe that he knows kung fu, and he has never taken a lesson in his life, and it's just all of these different layers that make that scene work. And then of course the choreography is just cool, and but if all it was great choreography though, it wouldn't keep you coming back. I don't think it,
But
it wouldn't make you as emotionally invested. So,
yeah, yeah.
no, I totally agree with the pacing, because that's, again, there are a lot of cool movies that have a lot of cool concepts, but because they didn't take the time to put the meaning within these different elements in the pacing,
Well, I see that a lot with new writers too, so speaking of flash fiction, you have 1,000 words to get people emotionally invested in characters they've never heard of before, a setting they've never heard of before, a plot they've never heard before. And this movie had 2 hours to do it, but that's still a very short amount of time. So yeah, every line of dialogue, every description has to pull double and triple duty. That's just what you have to do. And they really. Oh, fun fact about that. Like the fighting choreography we talked about too is I saw that Keanu Reeves was just coming off of a neck injury, which is why he looks like Frankenstein when he's fighting most of the time. So, I was like, all this kind of stuff, because he really couldn't kick very much because it requires. Oh, I'm a physical therapist in my day job also, but kicking requires a lot of flexion of the spine, and he couldn't do that because he had a
Mm,
disc issue going on back there. So their choreographer, who he did all kinds of stuff, but he developed his fighting style based around his injury, which
wow,
is cool. So,
that's awesome. All right, well
yeah.
let's move on to number three. What's your third reason to kind of watch it?
Silly enough, it's believability. you know, so you in speculative fiction, we talk a lot about suspension of belief. So usually you can get somebody if they enjoy the genre, if they're open-minded, you can get them to watch a movie about aliens, but not if it also has time travel, dinosaurs, and vampires. So there's a certain amount that you can expect people to believe in, and this movie does such a good job of taking such, at the time, a foreign concept and pulling us in because, and again, it's brilliant, is what we see as the real world in this movie is all fake, and what we see is out there, so to speak, in the real world when they're flying around in spaceships and stuff, we would consider that fake, but in the movie it's real. So they ground us in the Matrix at the very beginning of the movie, and these are things that we understand. We start out with Trinity sitting in a room fighting people. There's nothing crazy about that until she goes commando and flies through the air. But they ground it in a dark city, or or not necessarily dark city, but more like Blade Runner, where it's a kind of a grease slicked, neon signed, just kind of downtown Chicago, believable. I think they say at the turn of the 20th century or 21st century, I think. So I think it's based in 99 or so. But it was like, it's just this mundanity. I don't know. That's a word, sure. But you have these scenes where Neo is an office worker, and he's just bored out of his mind, and he's late because he's not inspired. And whenever he's getting just badgered by his boss, he looks out the window and there's this guy with cleaning the windows, like, there's a water cooler. So anyway, that's a tangent. But all of this just helps us understand that this is what he believes is reality. So don't think, which is absurd. The insanity of going to that job every day and essentially just forfeiting your life for a paycheck. That's insane. So what's the reverse of that? Seeking the truth. We're all in for that now because I don't want that water cooler job. So yeah, it just does a great job of pulling us in and letting us feel like Neo. His real name's Thomas Anderson, but it gives us a great reason to want to be with him and accept anything other than that reality, even if it's this bizarre, mind freak. So yeah, it does a great job of it.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's to kind of use a different term, there's that universal element to it. Like we all have those feelings of, is this all there is in life? You know, doing the laundry, picking up kids, doing the same thing over and over and over again. Is this all that life is? And we all have those moments, as needed as that stuff might be. We all have those moments of there's got to be something more, and how many stories have main characters that just want a different life and all of those sort of things. And so there's that sort of, but they of course place it in a whole different realm as far as
Sure.
virtual reality was, I don't know about just getting started, but it had been around a little while. But what we still had to stretch our imagination a little bit to think, oh, it's so virtual that we're just we can't even tell the difference. And
Yeah, the
so
term AI was that was tech jargon. People didn't know
oh
the term
sure,
unless you're in it, you know.
right, yeah, yeah. And now we can just go to Chat GPT and just do it.
Yeah, you can
Um,
ask Chat GPT to write the Matrix for you, probably.
Right. That would be an interesting
Woo!
video. That would be meta,
Yeah,
right? Is that meta?
that's definitely meta.
So no, and I think you're right. Like they did enough in the beginning to help you relate to the character who doesn't know, because we don't know. And a lot of times, that's a very common thing that writers will do. If it's a world nobody knows about, you have a character who doesn't know about the world, and then you have to you have to explain it to that guy or girl or whoever it is.
Yeah,
As they're experiencing it, you experience it. But again, you still have to do it like we put in, like we talked about in the previous point. You have to do it with a certain amount of pacing and layering that's not simply just exposition,
yeah.
because bad writing is, hey, why don't you tell me about this part of the world? That's just, but when it's needed for the next step, now there's meaning behind why I have to know this, why this is important, and why I have to learn this. And so I love it. Yeah, it's
It would
good.
be harder in some, some movies that don't have such an outlandish idea that we're trying to figure out. But this one, it's like, yeah, it's so easy to have Neo, who's already seeking the truth, which is the theme of the movie. So it's just serving up, lobs for home runs there of which is not, wasn't an accident. They chose to do it that way. But just the fact that Neo is looking for the truth, and again, he has all these questions naturally, and so it just comes naturally that we want to learn these things with him as opposed to being a burden. So
Yeah,
yeah,
excellent. All right, last point, number 4. Why should people watch this movie?
this is probably I wouldn't say it's my favorite point, but I this movie specifically, the rewatchability is so it's the setting. Um, One of my favorite directors is Guillermo del Toro,
Yeah.
and I love him. One of my favorite lines by him is never confuse plot with story. So a lot of times his movies get a little bit of flack because they don't have real novel ideas. His movies are a visual masterpiece. You look at Hellboy 2 as a perfect example. It was kind of this out of left field kind of movie. The first one was pretty good, but this one was just like, again, a visual feast. And he does all these little things. Another one by him is Crimson Peak. I don't know if you've seen Crimson Peak or not.
I don't know. Yeah, I
And
don't
you got
think
to
so.
watch Crimson Peak, put it on the list, Britt. Um, so it's a movie. I'm really big into Victorian horror. And it's essentially a haunted house movie, like the old House on Haunted Hill type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so this Victorian woman is stuck in a house with Loki before he was Loki, and he married her and took her away. And there's things in this movie like she sits in this chair, this green wingback chair. I have one right over there. And at the beginning of it, it's the same. It's a normal sized chair. And then I think they said they had like 20 different versions of this chair. And each scene, it got a little bigger because she kept shrinking in the way that she felt. So it's all
Hmm.
these small, attention to detail. So back to the Matrix, the set and even the cinematography and stuff is just, again, they had so much fun with it. So there's things
Mm-hmm.
like anytime they're in the Matrix, they use a green filter, which it reflected it again. You younger people won't understand, but it reflected those early days of DOS, where it was just green and black, and that green, they used the same shade over everything where you're in the matrix, so it gave you that feel of being digital. And then in the real world, they used a blue filter to
Hmm.
show that everything was kind of dying, and it was clear, it was crisper, but there was no warmth in the real world because the machines had sucked it all out. So little things like that. And again, I could go on and on about all the little things, the red pill, blue pill, the Alice in Wonderland elements, where they have rabbits showing up, and there's even littler stuff. Like I saw the other day that there's a moment whenever Morpheus is saying to Neo, he says, at some point, somebody's going to have to face the agents, which the agents are the big bad. They're, you can't beat them. You can only run from them because they're in the Matrix. They were created to police the Matrix, and they can control the Matrix. They can become anybody, and they can bend things, and you just can't beat them. So in that scene, they always have the black glasses on, and they use that a lot. They use reflections and mirrors because, again, that's integral to the plot and the theme. So in the
Hmm.
scene, Morpheus has got his black glasses on. He says, at some point, somebody's going to have to face him. And in his reflection, Neo's on one side, and there's an agent gun pointing at his head in the other glass. And you would never notice it unless you've seen it several times. And that's not reality. So they show Neo, and he's just standing there. But in the reflection, there's like it's showing that he's going to get shot. There's all little cool things like this that are Easter eggy before like the Marvel movies were around, and it was a cool thing. So the little things are great, but then also just the set immersion. Like I said, they recreated downtown Chicago to this believable world, and all these little details. Again, they do a neo noir theme throughout the movie. Again, it's reminiscent of Blade Runner, which is just a great thing because it's got these gritty, just lovable elements to it. So yeah, again, I could go on, but man, the set and the cinematography is just, and not to say nothing of bullet time, right?
Well,
which
and it works with the costuming, and it works with the hairstyles, and it works with like they have a different look when they're in the Matrix too, different costuming, different dress, and then there's a different sort of it's almost like handmade clothing when they're in the quote unquote real world, and where there's spaceships and stuff. And I was just sitting here wondering while you were talking. I was like, I wonder if anyone could go back and track the sales of long black coats
yes, the trench coats. Oh my gosh,
from like
glasses.
glasses definitely, but I know at least three or four people who had to go get out and get a long black, whether it was leather or whatever. It didn't matter whether it was leather or not. They were going to get a long black coat, and I got one. I got a long black coat
You were, you
because
were.
I was like, that's just cool. Um,
And that wasn't an easy feat because one, they're expensive. Two,
yeah.
this was before Amazon, so like you got to go to the mall and try to find a trench coat. So yeah, that was a wardrobe right there that,
Well,
yeah.
and that sort of theme, as much as it did borrow from others, I really do think probably more movies borrowed the visuals from Matrix than Matrix borrowed from other movies. I mean, you could kind of point to a couple things, but man, there were so many movies after the Matrix that kind of had that sort of visual look to them.
Well, what's important to note too is, yeah, and I love that the Wachowskis are so transparent because it gives us fuel on what to appreciate about the movie, because they tell, likely, I assume they're not lying, but they tell pretty much every influence that they've had. They put it in their movie. They give
Yeah,
all
yeah.
this homage to different sources that they loved. So, and my point being that no idea is completely new. We are creators reflecting our experiences. this again, total tangent. The other day, I'm a writer. I'm not, a big farmer or anything, but I was putting chicken wire around something the other day. I've never messed with chicken wire, but at the end of the roll, it's horrible. Whoever designed rolls of chicken wire is crazy because you have to pull this stuff out. So what I thought to myself is, the next story I write, I'm going to have a line that says, "You're more frustrating than the end of a roll of chicken wire." So you can't write a good story without being in the world. And the Wachowskis 100% did that. They took all their past experiences, all their past influences, and they just piled them into this movie in a seamless way. And like you said, that allows a lot of fodder for it to go out and inspire generations of other fiction as well. So it's very
Yeah,
cool.
the way I have viewed it, like you said, we're all borrowing something. When whatever story that we're telling, there's the old adage, there's only two, three, four, five different types of stories, whatever, depending on what book you read and who you talk to. There's only a few kinds of stories. There's only a few kind of characters, but and to me, the trick is, if I'm going to use something I'm influenced by, I have to know I'm doing it.
Yes.
I don't, like, I have to do it on purpose. Like, if I know that I'm going to use something that I got from Star Trek, let's say, or whatever, like, if I know I'm being influenced by Star Trek, then I have to own it. I have to be like, and I think that's what the Wachowskis do in their movie. They're like, look, this is a kung fu movie that we love,
Yeah.
and this
Yeah.
is a whatever. Like, these are our influences, and we're just going to be completely and totally honest that we borrowed, but we knew we were doing it. Like, it wasn't like they weren't trying to hide it and pass it off as their own,
Shit,
but
they hired the people that made the movies that they love to do what's on their movie,
yeah,
like.
exactly. But the way, like you said, the way they put it together with the theme, with the arc, with the different elements to it, it still made it new and
Yeah.
original, as much as they might have borrowed from other things. And I think that that's another lesson is, you know, I used to say this, derivative isn't necessarily bad if you do it well.
Yep.
And one of my favorite examples of that, I mean, to me, you might disagree, but I love the movie Real Steel
Okay. Yeah.
With Hugh Jackman. That is one of the most. That is Rocky and Rock'em Sock'em Robots,
Yes.
and Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone. I don't know if you remember that, the
Okay.
trucking
Yeah.
movie. Like,
Yeah.
it's basically three movies put together, and I thought I was gonna hate it. Like, I thought, I'm just gonna watch this because I loved Rock'em Sock'em Robots when I was a kid, and I'm just gonna rent it. And I'm like, why am I getting choked up at the end of this derivative movie? Right? It's because they did it on purpose, and they knew what they were doing, and they put heart and soul and theme and meaning into stuff, instead of just, we're just making a movie to. I guess they want to make money either way, right? But
Yeah.
but
It was so
um,
shiny. Um, so yeah, there's two main aspects of that. One's nostalgia, right? I
sure.
mean, whether you realize it watching it or not, again, sometimes people aren't even aware that it's Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but whenever you watch it, you get that feeling of comfort. And then the other aspect of that, which bleeds into it, is we were talking about the believability aspect. So you can only throw so much new stuff at people before they start pulling back. And even
Hmm.
though these things are wild, the whole Rock'em Sock'em Robots things, people already know about it. So that's not a new thing you're having to spend belief about. So you create a world with things that, okay, maybe they're a little bit outside of reality, but if people already realize them, you can package those and really drive some other new element home. So
Yeah.
yeah, very cool. Oh yeah, I love Real Steel, man. And it's almost like Pacific Rim, same deal. Everybody just wants to see giant robots beating some Godzilla creatures up. Like.
And if you do it right, and you make us believe and care about the characters, then yeah, I still like to go back and watch Pacific Rim. And my kids, and my son especially, he wants to watch that movie and the second one, and he wants to, but
Interestingly enough, I think that's also a Guillermo del Toro movie. Yeah, I
it
noticed.
is.
Yeah, because he talks about the attention to detail on the scrapes on the metal and all this stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
the version is great.
Hey, anytime you hit a big monster with a battleship or whatever that was, a tanker or whatever it was, as like a baseball bat, I'm
Yeah,
in. I'm in.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I was watching Matt Damon on a popular YouTube show where they eat hot wings. So at one point he was saying how streaming services now have almost killed movies like Good Will Hunting, where it's just a low budget, plot centered drama that and by kill I mean not go to the theater first,
Right.
they go straight to streaming services, because these movies that have huge budgets, if they're not raking in money, they don't have that second round of income going to DVD. You know, they get all the money
Right.
from the theater, then they get all the money from the DVDs. There's no DVDs anymore. So my point in all this saying, the movies that go to the theater, the ones that really do well, these blockbusters that are funded, they still have all the elements of Good Will Hunting. So they are kind of starting to blend the two genres now. So they're
Yeah.
not just action movies, they're not just dramas, they're just these awesome movies. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Andrew, this was fun as I knew it would be. It's great points, and the Matrix is obviously a classic, but I think you went over a lot of great points about why it's a classic. You know, why does something stand the test of time? And I think we all have that dream as writers, right? That we're going to write something that 50 years, after we're gone or whatever, the people are still going back to, not just because it was cool for 5 minutes. So, Andrew, why don't you let people know where they can find you and where they can find Havoc and all that stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. So real easy. It's called gohavok.com, GOHAVOK.com. We've got one of our end of season anthologies coming out, so you can go on there and pre-order that. We've got a launch party coming up. We have a new merch store. You can buy all kinds of cool stuff like this. All the different themes and stuff like that. Yeah, so just go to gohavok.com. That's kind of our central hub, and it's a pretty easy to navigate website. And again, like I said, you go there during a weekday and you're going to get a free story. You don't have to sign up for anything at that point. So yeah, go check us out. I'm around, other than that. But go to Go Havoc, and then you can find me other
Yeah,
places.
absolutely. Well, hey man, like I said, this was great, and for everyone who's watching, I'll put some of those links down in the description so people can click on them right there. All right. So, hey man, thanks again.
Britt, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. All right.